Chapter 1. The Illusion of the Spark. Think about that one dream you have tucked away in the back of your mind. You know the one. It is the ambition you quietly harbor, the goal you whisper to yourself when the house is still and the world has gone to sleep. Perhaps it is a business you want to build from the ground up. Perhaps it is a novel you have been meaning to write, a new language you wish to speak, or a physical transformation you have craved for years. You have imagined the finish line 1,000 times. You have pictured the exact expression on the faces of your friends and family when you finally reveal what you have accomplished. You know exactly what that triumph will taste like, but tomorrow morning arrives, and the dream remains exactly where it always stays, in your head. You look at the blank page, or the empty gym bag, or the daunting business plan, and you wait. You are waiting for a very specific feeling. You are waiting for the lightning bolt of inspiration to strike your chest, to fill your veins with an unstoppable surge of energy that will make the hard work feel effortless. You believe that if you can just find the right mindset, read the right quote, or listen to the perfect speech, you will finally unlock the eagerness required to begin. This is the great myth that keeps millions of brilliant, capable people locked in a cycle of permanent stagnation. You have been sold a lie about how the human mind operates. You have been led to believe that motivation is a prerequisite for action. You think motivation is the spark that must magically ignite before you can start the engine of your ambition. But motivation is not the spark. Motivation is the fire that begins to burn only after you have manually, and often painfully, coaxed it into existence. There are times when inspiration does hit like a hammer. We have all experienced that sudden, intoxicating rush of midnight enthusiasm. You decide, in a burst of clarity, that you are going to change your life. You buy the expensive running shoes, you clear off your desk, you download the budgeting software, and you feel invincible. But that feeling is a psychological sugar rush. It is incredibly sweet, it is totally consuming, and it is entirely impossible to maintain. By Tuesday afternoon, the sugar rush crashes. The glow fades, the shoes look heavy, the desk is cluttered again, and you are left standing at the bottom of a massive mountain, completely paralyzed by the sheer number of steps required to reach the top. You feel worse than you did before you started, because now you carry the added weight of another false start. The most successful people in the world operate on a completely different paradigm. They understand a fundamental truth about human psychology. There is only one reliable recipe for generating lasting motivation, and that recipe is success. Do not confuse this with massive, life-altering success. Those monumental victories happen only a handful of times in a normal lifespan, if they happen at all. The kind of success that generates endless, burning motivation is tiny, incremental, and painfully ordinary. It is the quiet rush of dopamine you experience when you observe yourself making a small amount of progress. It is the quiet pride of realizing you can play 3 chords on a guitar without looking at your fingers. It is the satisfaction of seeing your bank account grow by a single, modest deposit that you promised yourself you would make. Small successes are genuinely fun. They alter your brain chemistry. They make you feel competent, and competence breeds a deep, unshakable confidence. When you wait for the lightning bolt, you are robbing yourself of this daily joy. You are committing to a life of chronic dissatisfaction because you are constantly measuring the massive, terrifying distance between where you are today and where you want to be 5 years from now. To understand why this is so destructive, consider the deeply human desire to matter. We all want to be someone of substance. We want to be respected and admired. Imagine a person who decides to take up woodworking because they want to present a magnificent handcrafted dining table to their family. They want the applause. They want to be seen as a master craftsman. But because they are fixated entirely on the final moment of glory, the actual work feels like a miserable obstacle. They rush the process. They buy pre-cut wood to save time. They hire someone else to route the difficult joints. They gloss over the sanding. Finally, the table is finished, and they unveil it at a grand family dinner. For one evening, it is intoxicating. The family applauds, the guests marvel at the finish, and the builder stands tall, carrying themselves with a profound sense of dignity. They got exactly what they wanted. But the very next morning, the house is quiet. The guests are gone. The builder walks into the dining room, looks at the table, and the glow is entirely gone. The external validation evaporated the moment the room cleared. Why does this happen? Because accomplishments, no matter how grand, are just the cherry on top of a cake. The actual cake, the substance that fills you up and provides lasting emotional nourishment, is the process. The builder feels empty because they skipped the quiet daily satisfaction of the work itself. They missed the joy of learning the grain of the wood, the patience required to sharpen a chisel, the meditative rhythm of sanding a rough edge into something impossibly smooth. When your entire emotional state is tied to the finish line, your happiness is always hostage to the future. You spend months or years miserable, grinding your teeth, waiting for the one day when you finally cross the threshold so you can permit yourself to feel proud. And when that day passes, you are instantly left searching for the next massive goal to fill the void. You do not have to live this way. You can be ambitious, you can chase seemingly impossible dreams, and you can be deeply happy today. The path to immense success and the path to daily happiness are exactly the same road. It requires a radical shift in how you view your daily life. It requires you to set a massive, terrifying goal, use it to draw a map, and then completely forget about the destination. The destination is merely a compass bearing. What matters is the square foot of earth you are standing on right now. What matters is the singular task you have assigned yourself for today. When you detach your ego from the final podium and attach it to the daily execution of your plan, everything changes. If your plan calls for you to write 2 poorly constructed pages today, and you sit down and write those 2 pages, you are a winner today. You get to lay your head on the pillow tonight with the deep, settling satisfaction of a champion. You have manufactured your own success, which releases a genuine hit of dopamine, which physically creates the motivation you will need to wake up and write 2 more pages tomorrow. You do not lack the passion to change your life. You do not lack the genetic makeup of a high achiever, and you certainly do not lack motivation. You simply have the equation backward. You have been waiting for the fire to start itself so you can finally step into the warmth. But you are the match. You are the friction. The moment you strike the surface and take the first step, the spark will catch. The warmth will follow. You already possess everything you need to become exactly who you wish to be, provided you are willing to let go of the myth of the spark and embrace the gritty, beautiful reality of the work. Chapter 2. Action precedes motivation. Imagine standing in a massive, dimly lit hotel ballroom alongside thousands of other people. The music is pounding, the air is electric, and a charismatic speaker is pacing the stage, commanding you to unleash the dormant power lying deep within your soul. The climax of the weekend approaches, and you are told that if you can simply walk barefoot across a bed of glowing, smoking coals, you will shatter your mental barriers forever. You take the walk, the crowd cheers, and you go to sleep that night feeling utterly invincible, convinced that you have permanently unlocked an endless reservoir of drive. But then the sun comes up on Monday morning, your alarm goes off, your email inbox is overflowing, your daily obligations are looming, and you realize something deeply unsettling. You are the exact same person you were before the weekend began. The firewalk did not change your character because walking across hot coals is an isolated event that produces a temporary emotional high, much like a sugar rush. Once the adrenaline fades, you are left staring at the same mountain of work, wondering where all your newfound motivation went. This happens because our entire cultural understanding of motivation is fundamentally flawed. We treat motivation as a prerequisite. We define it as the mystical force that must magically appear before we can do anything difficult. If we do not feel motivated, we assume we cannot start. The reality is the exact opposite. Real motivation is not a spark, it is a result. It is the quiet, powerful sense of pride you feel after you have already taken action, which then fuels your willingness to do even more. The absolute best way to get motivated is simply to break a sweat, whether literally or metaphorically. The initial barrier to action is always the heaviest. Think about a time when you severely procrastinated on a task you actually enjoy. Perhaps you love to run or paint or write. Yet there are days when the mere thought of lacing up your shoes or staring at a blank canvas feels like an impossible burden. You invent distractions, rationalize delays, and avoid the work. But eventually, you force yourself to begin. 5 minutes into the run, the stiffness leaves your legs, your lungs find a rhythm, and a subtle rush of endorphins washes over you. You wonder why you ever resisted in the first place. That aversion to doing something difficult vanishes the moment you cross the threshold from inactivity to activity. This physical and psychological shift triggers a deeply rewarding mechanism in the human brain. Earning a small measure of success makes you feel competent, and competence naturally breeds confidence. Once you experience that tiny improvement, you want to experience it again. This creates a beautifully self-sustaining loop. Taking action yields a small success. That success generates motivation, and that motivation drives you to take further action. This is why traditional financial advice often misses the mark when dealing with human psychology. Rationally, if you are trying to climb out of debt, you should funnel all your extra money toward the credit card with the highest interest rate. But if that balance is massive, pouring a tiny amount of extra cash into it each month feels like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The finish line is too far away to provide any emotional reward. Instead, if you aggressively pay off the card with the smallest balance first, regardless of the interest rate, you get to completely eliminate a debt. You see tangible proof of your capability. That genuine victory floods your system with the motivation required to attack the next debt on the list. To sustain this cycle, you must abandon the search for shortcuts. We live in an era obsessed with hacking the system. We are constantly sold the illusion that there is a secret trick to bypassing the grueling foundational work required for true mastery. But while a life hack might teach you how to organize your calendar more efficiently, it will never teach you how to acquire a complex, deeply valuable skill. Shortcuts rob you of the very friction required to build genuine confidence. True confidence is never the result of standing in front of a mirror and shouting positive affirmations. It is the byproduct of exhaustive preparation. Picture a young professional preparing to pitch a radical new strategy to a room full of skeptical veteran executives. If she relies on a manufactured burst of bravado to carry her through the presentation, her voice will shake the moment she is challenged. But if she has spent the last 3 weeks relentlessly anticipating every counter-argument, analyzing the data from every conceivable angle, and practicing her delivery until it lives in her muscle memory, she will walk into that boardroom with an unshakable calm. Her confidence is real because she has earned it. She knows exactly what she is capable of because she has already done the work. If doing the work is the only path to building this unstoppable momentum, then we must confront one of the most dangerous habits that prevents us from ever starting. When we conceive a massive, life-altering goal, our first instinct is usually to tell everyone we know. Imagine you are sitting at a dinner table surrounded by friends. The wine is flowing, the atmosphere is warm, and you confidently announce that you have decided to write a sweeping historical novel or perhaps hike a grueling 2,000-mile mountain trail. Instantly, the table erupts in admiration. Your friends tell you how brave you are, how incredibly challenging that will be, and how they cannot wait to read your book or see your photos from the summit. You spend the next hour detailing your elaborate plans, basking in the glow of their respect. Psychologically, you have just severely crippled your chances of ever completing the goal. When you announce your intentions and others acknowledge them, your brain registers a premature sense of accomplishment. You receive the emotional reward of possessing a new, impressive identity without having done a single ounce of the actual work. You get to feel like a novelist or a mountaineer while sitting comfortably in a restaurant. By the time you wake up the next morning, the hunger required to actually sit at a keyboard for hundreds of hours or sleep in the freezing rain has been deeply diminished. The applause has already been consumed. Keep your ambitions completely silent. Let the quiet accumulation of your daily efforts be the only reward you seek. You might assume that the people who managed to work in this quiet, relentless manner were simply born with superhuman willpower. You look at someone who has transformed their body or earned a complex degree while raising a family, and you assume they possess a genetic drive that you lack. They do not. Exceptional willpower is an illusion. The people who appear to have an endless supply of self-discipline have actually just designed their lives to require as little willpower as possible, relying on systems and habits rather than momentary grit. They also understand that you do not need to discover your life's great passion before you can begin. We are constantly told that we must scour our souls to find our one true calling, and only then will we have the fuel to succeed. But passion is rarely the starting line. It is almost always the finish line. Imagine a person who casually pulls a dusty, forgotten acoustic guitar out from the back of a closet. They do not have a burning desire to become a world-renowned musician. They just want to learn how to play a single song. The first few weeks are miserable. Their fingers bleed, The chords sound terrible and they feel incredibly clumsy, but they commit to practicing for just 20 minutes a day. Eventually, they manage to seamlessly transition from one chord to the next. It sounds like actual music. That tiny victory is intoxicating. It makes them want to learn a second song. The second song leads to understanding scales, which leads to writing their own melodies. Years later, they are deeply, profoundly passionate about the guitar. The passion did not create the effort. The sustained effort created the passion. You do not need to wait for the fire. You do not need to wait for the perfect emotional state, the ultimate shortcut, or the applause of your peers. You simply need to pick up the tools in front of you and begin. Accept the discomfort, embrace your flaws, and take the first physical step into the work. Break a sweat. The motivation you have been desperately searching for is waiting for you on the other side of action. Chapter 3. The Paradox of the End Goal. Consider the profound difference between a choice and an obligation. Tomorrow morning, when your alarm clock shatters the silence of your bedroom, you will likely rise, get dressed, and make your way to work. You will navigate traffic, manage your responsibilities, and handle the endless micro-stresses of the day. You will do this without agonizing over whether or not you feel like doing it. Going to work, paying your bills, and feeding your family are non-negotiable obligations. Because they are not framed as choices, they do not deplete your mental energy. You simply execute the routine. Now, compare that absolute certainty to the fragile nature of a personal ambition. If you decide you want to learn a complex new skill or dramatically transform your physical health, you are immediately confronted with a relentless barrage of choices. You have to choose to wake up an hour earlier. You have to choose to decline an invitation to relax. You have to choose to endure discomfort. The human brain possesses a finite amount of willpower, and every single time you force yourself to choose long-term delayed gratification over short-term comfort, you drain that mental reservoir. This is why, as the day wears on, our self-control evaporates and we abandon our most cherished personal goals. We turn our ambitions into daily negotiations, and eventually, exhaustion wins. This psychological friction is severely compounded by the way we are taught to visualize our goals. We are constantly told to keep our eyes on the prize. We are instructed to obsess over the finish line, to paste pictures of our ultimate desires on vision boards, and to let the grand image of our future success pull us through the darkness of our current struggles. This is terrible advice. In practice, keeping your massive end goal constantly in mind is one of the fastest ways to destroy your motivation. To understand why, you must look at the devastating emotional gap between here and there. Imagine you purchase a severely dilapidated, century-old farmhouse. The roof is caved in, the floorboards are rotting, and the yard is a tangled jungle of weeds. Your dream, your massive end goal, is to host warm, joyful family holidays in a fully restored, pristine home. You can practically smell the wood smoke and hear the laughter, but on your very first morning of work, you stand in the freezing rain amid piles of broken glass and wet plaster, holding a single, empty trash bag. If you spend that morning constantly comparing your single trash bag of debris to the magnificent restored mansion in your imagination, you will be crushed by the impossibility of the task. The distance between your current reality and your ultimate dream is so vast that your tiny daily effort feels entirely meaningless. You will look at your blistered hands, look at the ruined house, and realize that you have barely made a fraction of a % of progress. The sheer scale of the ultimate goal will not inspire you. It will demoralize you. It will make you feel profoundly inadequate. You will inevitably conclude that the mountain is too high to climb, and you will abandon the property. The paradox of the end goal is that focusing on the magnitude of your ambition actually prevents you from achieving it. Dreams are deeply important because they give us our initial direction, but a dream without a daily process is nothing more than a fantasy that will eventually turn into a heavy regret. The most accomplished people you will ever meet navigate this paradox by using a surprisingly simple mechanism. They use their massive dream as a compass to determine their heading, and then they completely forget about the goal. They sever their emotional attachment to the finish line and transfer all of their psychological energy to the daily process. Process is the granular, unglamorous mechanics of how you move forward. If your goal is to be a wonderful parent, your process is the way you actively listen to your child when they are upset, the way you enforce boundaries with kindness, and the way you build their self-esteem on a random Tuesday evening. If your goal is to lead a company, your process is how you systematically handle a difficult employee conversation, how you structure your morning meetings, and how you consistently evaluate the data. By shifting your total focus to the process, you instantly solve the emotional crisis of the feedback loop. Human beings are their own worst critics. We desperately crave positive feedback to keep moving, but we rarely receive it from the outside world. If your metric for success is whether or not you have restored the entire farmhouse, you will go to sleep feeling like a failure for hundreds of consecutive days because the house is not yet finished. You will starve yourself of the positive reinforcement required to keep working. But if you forget the house and make your only metric for success the completion of your daily process, everything changes. If your process dictates that you must fill 3 trash bags with plaster today, and you fill those 3 bags, you win. You are a complete success today. You have hit your target. You experience a genuine surge of pride because you did exactly what you promised yourself you would do. You are no longer comparing yourself to a distant, intimidating horizon. You are evaluating yourself against the quiet, manageable reality of today's workload. This is how you build an unstoppable momentum. You create a daily routine that guarantees progress. You accept that routine as a non-negotiable obligation, just like commuting to work. And you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop evaluating the distance left to travel. You permit yourself to feel deeply satisfied by the quiet dignity of a single day of focused effort. Set a massive, beautiful goal. Use it to map out the daily actions required to reach it. And then, with absolute ruthlessness, forget the goal. Look only at the ground beneath your feet. Master the work of today. Celebrate the completion of today's process, and trust that tomorrow will take care of itself. If you commit to the process, the destination becomes inevitable. Chapter 4. Designing the Inevitable Process. There is a sobering realization that separates the dreamers from the people who actually change their lives. We love the feeling of selecting a grand ambition, and we naturally assume that because it is our life, we remain in complete control of how we spend our days. But once you commit to a massive, meaningful target, a profound shift must occur in your mindset. You no longer get to choose what you want to do. The goal you have selected becomes the absolute authority, and it dictates your daily actions for you. Let us imagine a person who is exhausted by the suffocating weight of living paycheck to paycheck, and they decide to completely transform their financial reality. They set a massive goal to build an independent consulting business that will eventually replace their salary. For the first few days, the dream feels glorious and liberating. But inevitably, a cold, rainy Tuesday evening arrives. They have just finished a brutal 9-hour shift at their regular job, their body aches, and their friends call to invite them out for dinner and a few drinks to unwind. The couch in their living room looks incredibly inviting. The television remote is sitting right there, offering an instant, effortless escape from the stress of the day. This is the exact moment where the vast majority of dreams quietly suffocate. The aspiring entrepreneur believes they have a choice between relaxing with friends or working on their business. But if they truly intend to achieve their goal, that choice is an illusion. The goal demands that they spend the next 3 hours drinking black coffee, drafting client proposals, and building a website. You cannot claim to want the destination if you actively refuse to walk the harsh, unglamorous path required to get there. Once the goal is set, your personal preferences regarding how you spend your free time become entirely irrelevant. If you are not willing to pay the daily price, you must have the honesty to admit that you do not actually want the goal. You only want the fantasy of the goal. This realization is not meant to feel oppressive. In fact, it is meant to set you entirely free. When you accept that your ambition dictates your actions, you can build a precise daily routine that completely eliminates the exhaustion of decision anxiety. If your goal is to lose a significant amount of weight, you do not wake up every morning and negotiate with yourself about whether you feel like exercising or debate what you might have for lunch. You map out exactly what ingredients you will consume and precisely what physical movements you will execute on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. You write it down with absolute, uncompromising specificity. Telling yourself to go jogging is a vague, fragile wish that will crumble at the first sign of bad weather. Deciding to walk at a brisk pace for 45 minutes before breakfast is a concrete process. By deciding exactly what you will do ahead of time, you remove the burden of making choices in the moment, allowing you to operate on sheer, unstoppable momentum. As you begin to execute this daily process, you will quickly realize that your current life is not structurally designed to accommodate this new ambition. Time is a finite, precious resource, and it will not magically expand to fit your new routine. If you add a demanding process to your day, something else must be ruthlessly discarded. You will have to rework your schedule, sacrifice familiar leisure activities, and perhaps condition your body to wake up long before the sun rises. You must actively trade your current comfort for your future success. There will be days when the process feels impossibly heavy. An unexpected crisis at work will drain your energy, or a minor physical ache will disrupt your perfect workout plan. The average person uses these disruptions as a convenient excuse to abandon the entire endeavor. The high achiever simply adjusts the process to keep the momentum alive. If you cannot complete a strenuous run because you feel a sudden twinge in your leg, you do not surrender and retreat to the couch. You adapt the routine to safely accommodate the limitation, perhaps walking instead, ensuring that the daily habit remains unbroken. You protect the integrity of the process at all costs, understanding that a modified effort is always infinitely more valuable than no effort at all. To sustain this relentless execution over months and years, you must fortify your mind against the constant whispering temptation to quit. The most powerful weapon you possess in this psychological battle is the specific language you use to define yourself. When faced with a temptation that threatens to derail your process, the words you speak, both internally and aloud, dictate your probability of failure. Imagine our aspiring business owner is offered a massive, time-consuming distraction by a well-meaning friend. If they decline by saying, "I can't go out, I have to work on my business," they are speaking the language of deprivation. "I can't" implies that they desperately want to engage in the distraction, but some cruel, external force is holding them back. It leaves the mental door cracked open for negotiation and eventual surrender. But what if instead they look their friend in the eye and say, "I don't go out on weeknights anymore"? The phrase "I don't" represents a profound structural shift in identity. It is a firm declaration of exactly who they have become. Statements like, "I don't eat refined sugar," or "I don't miss morning workouts," or "I don't negotiate my prices," carry absolute, unwavering conviction. They build an impenetrable brick wall against temptation because they do not rely on fragile reserves of willpower. They rely on a deeply rooted sense of self. When you stop telling the world what you cannot do and start declaring what you simply do not do, you stop making excuses and start enforcing a new reality. You step into the powerful identity of the person who has already achieved the goal long before the finish line is ever crossed. Chapter 5. The Joy of Serial Achievement. From the time we are old enough to understand the concept of a career, we are pressured to choose a single path. We are told that true mastery requires absolute sacrifice and that we must pour tens of thousands of hours of obsessive, unwavering focus into a single pursuit if we ever hope to be world-class. We are led to believe that dividing our attention is a recipe for mediocrity, but the relentless pursuit of absolute perfection in a single solitary domain is often a trap. It forces us to suppress the vast majority of our potential, and it ignores a beautiful truth about the human lifespan. You do not need to be in the top fraction of a percent in the world to experience profound success and deep fulfillment. Reaching a high level of proficiency in a skill is entirely achievable without sacrificing your entire existence to it. When you release the paralyzing pressure of needing to be the absolute best in the world, a remarkable new paradigm opens up. You are free to become a serial achiever. Think about the last time you attended a social gathering and someone asked you what you do for a living. You likely offered a single defining noun. You said you were a teacher or a manager or a software engineer. But what if you could authentically add the word "and" to that sentence? What if you could introduce yourself by saying, "I manage a logistics team, and I am a competitive amateur baker, and I write mystery novels"? Society often stigmatizes the "and," incorrectly assuming that if a person pursues multiple passions, they must be struggling to succeed in their primary career. We view specialization as the ultimate badge of honor, but in reality, the modern landscape increasingly values the generalist, the dynamic individual who can synthesize a broad range of skills, experiences, and perspectives. More importantly, your own happiness demands that you become more than just one thing. If you live an average lifespan, you have roughly 8 to 10 distinct phases of 5 to 7 years stretching out ahead of you. That is enough time to dedicate a half-decade to mastering a completely new discipline, achieving a massive goal, and then moving on to conquer the next one. You have the time to build a rich, multifaceted identity. You do not have to abandon your career to explore a side hustle, a physical challenge, or a creative endeavor. You simply have to be willing to weave the pursuit into the fabric of your daily routine. This pursuit of personal goals is not a luxury, it is an emotional necessity. When we plan our lives, we tend to prioritize professional milestones because they provide tangible financial security. But project yourself decades into the future. Imagine you are 80 years old, sitting quietly on a porch, reflecting on the totality of your life. It is practically a guarantee that you will not look back and deeply regret missing out on a specific promotion or wish you had spent a few more late nights staring at spreadsheets. The deepest, heaviest regrets are always personal. You will mourn the book you never wrote, the instrument you never learned to play, or the physical feat you never attempted. There are two distinct types of pain you will encounter in this life: the sharp, temporary pain of daily discipline and the dull, crushing ache of permanent regret. Discipline weighs ounces, but regret weighs tons. Setting and achieving massive personal goals is the only known cure for the tragedy of what could have been. However, before you rush out to conquer a wild, ambitious dream, you must submit to a harsh, grounding reality check. Ambition is meaningless if it is built on a collapsing foundation. We all have fundamental human needs that must be secured before we can chase self-actualization. You must be relatively financially stable, you must have a baseline of physical health, and you must cultivate strong, supportive relationships. These are absolute, non-negotiable requirements for a happy life. Imagine an incredibly driven individual who decides they want to train for a grueling multi-day endurance race. They dedicate 20 hours a week to running, cycling, and meal prepping. They are fiercely disciplined, but simultaneously their business is failing. They are drowning in credit card debt, and their marriage is quietly falling apart because they are never mentally present. Their pursuit of an extreme fitness goal is not inspiring. It is deeply selfish and wildly destructive. It is impossible to feel genuine fulfillment from crossing a finish line if your basic survival needs are actively crumbling beneath you. If you are constantly terrified about how you will pay your rent, or if your physical health is actively deteriorating, you have absolutely no business dedicating your energy to a frivolous hobby. Your massive goal must be to fix your foundation. Only when your baseline needs are met can you harness the true joy of pursuing the and without the suffocating weight of guilt. Once your foundation is secure and you have selected a meaningful target, you must confront the final, fatal hurdle of achievement. You must fundamentally change your relationship with the concept of an idea. We mistakenly treat the word idea as a noun. We treat it as a precious, static object that we can hold in our minds and admire from afar. You have undoubtedly had moments of brilliant inspiration. Perhaps you noticed a gap in the market for a new product, or envisioned a community program that could change lives. You spent weeks talking about it with your friends, mapping out the possibilities, and feeling the warm glow of your own cleverness. But months passed, and you never took a single physical step toward making it real. Years later, you watch someone else launch that exact same concept, and you console yourself by claiming you had the idea first. But you did not actually have an idea. An idea does not exist in the real world until it is paired with execution. An idea without action is nothing more than a ghost, a passing thought that ultimately transforms into a bitter regret. Wishing, hoping, and planning for the perfect moment to start is the most unrealistic approach to life you can possibly adopt. The perfect moment is a myth. To become a true serial achiever, you must turn the word idea into a verb. You must have a profound bias for action. You must trust your judgment, accept the fact that you will make messy, uncomfortable mistakes, and physically begin the work. Dreaming big is an absolute requirement for a spectacular life. but you must aggressively drag those dreams out of the clouds and anchor them in the dirt of reality. Let everyone else live in the safe, quiet illusion of their unfulfilled potential. You must be the one who actively builds a plan, steps into the friction, and turns the impossible into the inevitable. Chapter 6. Engineering Unstoppable Willpower. We look at people who wake up long before dawn, run 10 miles in the freezing rain, build thriving enterprises, and consistently choose a salad over a cheeseburger, and we feel a deep settling sense of inadequacy. We assume they were born with an iron-forged reserve of self-discipline. We look at our own struggles to avoid hitting the snooze button and conclude that we simply lost the genetic lottery for mental toughness. We believe that willpower is a mystical, infinite resource that some people possess and others simply lack. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how human endurance actually works. The most remarkably disciplined people on Earth do not possess superhuman willpower. In fact, they actively design their lives so that they almost never have to use it. Willpower is not a character trait. It is a finite, highly exhaustible biological resource. Think of your mind as a battery that powers your self-control. Every single decision you make from the moment you open your eyes drains a tiny fraction of that battery. Choosing which shirt to wear drains it. Deciding what to eat for breakfast drains it. Navigating traffic, prioritizing emails, and resolving a conflict at the office all drain it. By the time you arrive home in the evening, your decision-making battery is completely dead. This is exactly why almost no one breaks their diet at 9 in the morning. We break our promises to ourselves at 8 o'clock at night, when our mental energy is utterly depleted and the primitive part of our brain screams for the easiest, most comforting shortcut available. If you want to achieve massive goals, you cannot rely on willpower, because your willpower will always abandon you when you are tired. Instead, you must engineer an environment where doing the right thing requires zero decision-making. You do this by aggressively eliminating choices. If you want to transform your physical health, you do not wake up and ask yourself if you feel like going to the gym. You pack your gym bag the night before and place it physically in front of your front door. You lay your athletic clothes at the foot of your bed. You prepare your meals on Sunday afternoon and place them in the front of the refrigerator. When the alarm rings, you do not have to make a single choice. The path of least resistance has been paved for you. You bypass the mental friction entirely. You make your most critical decisions the night before, when your motivation is safe and theoretical, so that your exhausted morning self merely has to execute a pre-written script. There are times, however, when you will face a monumental task that requires a massive, sustained burst of output. Perhaps you have a career-defining project due, or a mountain of backlog that threatens to crush you. In these moments, you cannot rely on standard routines. You must manufacture an extreme sprint of productivity. To do this, you must radically alter your environment to signal to your brain that this is not a normal day. You start by going completely dark, shutting off every notification and informing the world that you are entirely unreachable. You begin at a bizarre hour, perhaps 3 in the morning, because stepping completely outside of your normal rhythm makes the first few hours feel exciting and strange. You delay your normal rewards. If you usually listen to music while you work in silence for the first 4 hours, saving the music for the exact moment your energy begins to wane. But the greatest secret of sustaining massive productivity lies in how you take your breaks. Most of us work until we reach a natural stopping point. We finish a major chapter or complete a difficult spreadsheet, and then we stop, exhausted and relieved. This is a fatal psychological error. When you sit down the next day, you are staring at the terrifying blank beginning of the next major hurdle. Generating the momentum to start again feels like pushing a boulder up a cliff. Instead, master the art of stopping in the middle of joy. Imagine an exhausted graphic designer who is building a massive, complex campaign. They have just slogged through hours of tedious formatting, and they finally reach the most exciting, creative part of the design, the exact element they have been dying to build all day. The instinct is to ride that high and finish it. But the master stops right there. They close the laptop right in the middle of the most thrilling part of the work. The next morning, when they sit down with their coffee, they are not staring at a blank page. They are staring at a downhill slope. Their brain is eager and desperate to finish the fun task they left incomplete. Within seconds, they are back in a state of absolute flow, and that soaring momentum carries them effortlessly through the rest of the day. Even with a perfectly engineered environment and brilliant psychological tricks, life will inevitably throw unexpected, high-stakes decisions in your path. These are the moments that traditionally demand massive willpower. But there is a way to bypass the mental exhaustion of these moments entirely, using the most powerful mental shortcut in existence. When you are faced with a difficult choice, do not weigh the pros and cons. Do not negotiate with your desires. Ask yourself one single defining question based entirely on your identity. What would the person I am becoming do? Imagine a young couple who have sacrificed for years, saving every spare dollar to finally launch their own independent business. They are exhausted, and a targeted advertisement offers them an incredible deal on a luxury 2-week tropical vacation. The money is sitting in their savings account. They can technically afford it. If they try to use willpower to resist, they will agonize over the decision. They will justify the expense by saying they have worked hard and deserve a break. The mental negotiation will drain them, but if they use the identity question, the decision takes less than a second. They ask, would successful, disciplined business owners spend their critical startup capital on a fleeting luxury? The answer is instantly, undeniably no. The debate is over before it begins. When you know exactly what you are trying to build and exactly who you are trying to become, you no longer have to make choices. Your ultimate goal makes the choices for you. You simply act in accordance with your new identity. This unwavering commitment to identity is what ultimately drives you into the rarest, most sacred space in any pursuit, the realm of obsessive detail. Success requires inspiration, and it requires execution. But execution alone is common. What separates the breathtaking from the ordinary is a fanatical devotion to the tiny, invisible details that no one else will ever notice. Picture a master tailor constructing a bespoke suit. The exterior is flawless, the fit is magnificent, and the client is already thrilled. But the tailor spends an additional 3 hours meticulously restitching the interior lining of a hidden pocket. The client will never see it. The world will never know it is there. But the tailor knows. The tailor understands that true greatness is not a performance for the crowd. It is a private standard of excellence. It is the refusal to accept good enough when perfection is within reach, even if it costs you sleep, energy, and comfort. Going the extra mile is an incredibly lonely place. When you are restitching the hidden pocket of your own life, when you are staying late to refine a presentation that is already acceptable, or running an extra mile in the dark when no one is watching, you will look around and realize that no one else is there. Everyone else went home. Everyone else accepted the standard of average. But that lonely, quiet space is exactly where undeniable mastery is forged. You do not need willpower when you fall deeply in love with the standard of your own work. You simply become a person who does not know how to stop until the job is truly, beautifully complete. Chapter 7. The Mathematics of Success. There is a specific hollow ache that comes with being told no. Whether it is a rejection letter for a manuscript you poured your soul into, a dismissed proposal at work, or a failed attempt at launching a small business, failure has a way of feeling deeply, uncomfortably personal. We are conditioned to view rejection as a mirror reflecting our own inadequacy. We assume that if we were simply more talented, more charismatic, or more intelligent, the world would naturally open its doors for us. When the doors remain shut, we take it as a definitive verdict on our worth, and we surrender. But if you want to understand how the most resilient, high-achieving people on Earth operate, you must completely strip the emotion out of failure. You must stop viewing success as a mystical blessing bestowed upon the chosen few and start viewing it as a cold, hard game of mathematics. Success, at its absolute core, is deeply probabilistic. Imagine a brilliant but inexperienced graphic designer trying to launch her own freelance agency. For her first month, she spends hours carefully crafting bespoke pitches to 10 different local businesses. She pours her heart into the designs. One by one, 9 of those businesses decline her offer. By the time the 9th rejection arrives, she is sitting in her car, completely demoralized, ready to abandon her dream and return to the safety of a corporate cubicle. She feels she is simply not cut out for the industry. But a seasoned professional would look at that exact same scenario and celebrate. A professional would tell her that she has just discovered her baseline metric. If she closes one client for every 10 pitches she makes, she does not have a talent problem. She has a volume problem. If she needs 5 clients to survive the month, she does not need to sit in her car and cry about her lack of skill. She simply needs to engineer a system that allows her to make 50 pitches. When you adopt this probabilistic mindset, rejection loses its sting. Failure ceases to be a traumatic event and becomes nothing more than a necessary data point. You realize that a certain amount of failure is absolutely required to reach the inevitable success. If your ratio is 1 in 10, then every time you hear a no, you are mathematically one step closer to a yes. You stop wondering if you are good enough, and you start focusing entirely on working your number. This philosophy is the ultimate antidote to overwhelming ambition. When we set a massive, life-altering goal, the sheer scale of the endeavor can paralyze us. Let us say you decide to write a sweeping, comprehensive historical book. The thought of writing 100,000 words is terrifying. It feels like an impossible mountain of text. If you wake up every morning fixated on the mountain, you will never write a single sentence. But if you apply the mathematics of success, the mountain vanishes. 100,000 words over the course of a single year is roughly 274 words a day. That is it. That is a single, robust paragraph. You do not have to write a book today. You only have to write 274 words. If you can maintain the quiet, unglamorous discipline to hit that tiny mathematical target every single day, the completion of your masterpiece is an absolute, unavoidable certainty. You do not need to be inspired every day. You do not need to feel creative. You only need to hit your number. However, there is a dangerous trap hidden within the comfort of repetition. Simply putting in the hours is not enough. Repeating a task blindly, without engagement, guarantees that you will permanently plateau. If you type your daily words without thought, or blindly swing a tennis racket 1,000 times with terrible form, you are not working your number. You are merely reinforcing your own flaws. True mastery requires that every single repetition is infused with relentless, agonizing purpose. Think about a concert pianist preparing for a world-class symphony. They do not practice by playing the entire concerto from beginning to end over and over again, hoping they will magically improve. That is the amateur's approach. The master isolates the exact 3 measures that consistently trip up their fingers. They play those 3 measures at an excruciatingly slow speed, analyzing the minute angle of their wrist and the exact pressure of their fingertips. They reach the absolute edge of their current ability, where the music feels clumsy and frustrating, and they stay in that zone of discomfort until the flaw is ironed out. To make your repetitions count, you must design a feedback loop that is immediate and unforgiving. If you are trying to become a master public speaker, you do not practice your speech alone in your bedroom 10 times and hope for the best. You record yourself on a camera and you force yourself to watch the playback immediately after you finish. It will be incredibly uncomfortable to watch your own nervous tics and hear your filler words, but that immediate, brutal feedback is the only way to adapt. You must constantly experiment. Try delivering the speech twice as fast to see where your breathing breaks down. Try delivering it in slow motion to master your pauses. You must treat your own skill set like a laboratory, tweaking the variables until the formula is perfect. There will also be phases in your life where the number you need to work cannot be perfectly quantified. There are times when you are trying to break into a fiercely guarded industry or trying to build a network from absolute scratch in a city where you do not know a single soul. In these scenarios, you cannot rely on a neat equation. Your daily number cannot be 10 or 50 or 100. Your number must become as many as humanly possible. Picture a young, deeply passionate chef who moves to a culinary capital with no money, no connections, and no formal pedigree. He knows that raw culinary talent alone will not get him a job in a Michelin-starred kitchen. He understands that opportunity is a game of exposure. So, he prints a stack of simple, elegant business cards. Every day, during the narrow window between lunch and dinner service, he walks to the back doors of the finest restaurants in the city. He waits in the alleyways. When a sous chef steps out for air, he introduces himself. He does not beg for a job. He simply states his passion, asks a single thoughtful question about their menu, hands them a card, and leaves. He does this every single day. He goes to farmers' markets and shakes hands with the suppliers. He sends handwritten notes to managers, thanking them for the brief moments of their time. He faces an avalanche of rejection, silence, and closed doors. But he refuses to take it personally because he knows he is simply working an infinite number. He is flooding the ecosystem with his presence, and eventually, inevitably, a line cook at a prestigious restaurant calls in sick on a busy Friday night. The executive chef looks at the bulletin board, sees the handwritten note from the relentless young kid, and makes a phone call. The young chef did not wait to be discovered. He mathematically forced the universe to yield an opportunity through sheer, overwhelming volume. This is the unglamorous, gritty reality of high achievement. It is not about waiting for the stars to align. It is about understanding the probabilities of your chosen field, breaking your massive ambitions down into daily, bite-sized quotas, and relentlessly executing those quotas with deep, mindful purpose. It requires you to make peace with failure, to embrace the boredom of the grind, and to trust that if you put enough high-quality repetitions into the system, the results will eventually compound into something magnificent. You must stop wishing for a lighter burden and start building broader shoulders through the quiet, relentless mathematics of the work. Chapter 8. Emulating the Masters. There is a very specific, sinking sensation that arrives a few weeks into any truly ambitious journey. You have set a massive goal. You have designed an environment that eliminates choice. You have diligently begun to work your daily numbers. But as the initial adrenaline fades, the sheer gravity of the endeavor finally settles onto your shoulders. You hit a plateau. You experience a string of brutal rejections. The mountain suddenly looks infinitely steeper than it did from the safety of the valley, and a quiet, terrifying realization washes over you. You have absolutely no idea how to navigate the terrain ahead. When this crisis of confidence occurs, modern culture tells us to seek out a coach. We are encouraged to find someone who will put an arm around our shoulder, validate our exhaustion, and gently coax us forward. We look for someone who will modify the routine to accommodate our sore muscles, someone who will offer warm platitudes about doing our best, and someone who will constantly remind us that the journey is supposed to be fun. But if your goal is to achieve something extraordinary, something that pushes the absolute boundaries of your potential, you do not need a coach. You need a professional. A professional does not care about your feelings, and they certainly do not care about your comfort. A professional has already scaled the mountain you are currently staring at, and they understand that mastery requires a level of sacrifice that most people are completely unwilling to endure. They do not coddle. They simply present the unvarnished, brutal blueprint of what success actually demands, and they expect you to execute it without complaint. Imagine an aspiring screenwriter who is struggling to finish their first script. They hire a creative coach who tells them to follow their muse, to write only when they feel a spark of inspiration, and to be gentle with themselves when the words refuse to flow. The writer feels understood, but a year later, the script remains unfinished. Now, imagine that same writer sits down with a veteran, award-winning screenwriter. The veteran does not ask about the novice's feelings. The veteran simply says, "I wake up at 4 a.m. every single day. I sit at my desk in the dark, and I write 10 pages before my children wake up. I do this when I am exhausted. I do this when I am sick. I do this when I hate every word I am typing. If you want to make a living doing this, that is the job." When the novice hears this, they will experience that familiar sinking feeling in the pit of their stomach. The fantasy of the glamorous, inspired artist evaporates, replaced by the crushing reality of blue-collar discipline. But that sinking feeling is a gift. It is the death of an illusion. The professional has handed the novice the exact architecture of success, and now the novice has a profound choice: walk away or embrace the grueling reality of the work. You do not even need to meet a professional to emulate one. The blueprints for greatness are freely available in the biographies, interviews, and documented routines of the most accomplished people in history. You must relentlessly study the people who have already built the exact life you desire. If you are naturally timid, do not study someone who is quiet and reserved. Study a master negotiator who commands every room they enter. Adopt their morning routines. Copy their methods for organizing their day. Emulate the exact metrics they use to measure their own success. You do not need to invent a new path to greatness when a perfectly paved highway already exists. However, if you do decide to step into the physical arena and seek out real-world mentors, you must learn how to infiltrate their community. The greatest mistake amateurs make is walking into a room full of veterans and immediately demanding attention. They ask for favors, they boast about their untested ideas, and they attempt to leapfrog the necessary period of initiation. They are instantly rejected by the group. Picture a novice joining an elite, volunteer search and rescue team. The team is comprised of hardened veterans who have spent decades pulling lost hikers out of freezing ravines. The amateur does not walk into the staging area and demand to lead the next expedition. The amateur walks in and finds the most tedious, unglamorous job available. They spend 3 hours quietly scrubbing mud off the climbing ropes. They restock the trauma bags in absolute silence. When they finally speak, it is not to brag. It is to ask a highly specific, humble question about how to tie a complex anchor knot. This quiet, humble integration is how you earn access to the masters. You pay your dues in the shadows. You volunteer for the heavy lifting that no one else wants to do. You prove through your quiet labor that you respect the craft and that you are committed for the long haul. When you demonstrate that you are there to serve the community rather than extract value from it, the veterans will naturally take you under their wing. They will recognize your hunger, and they will freely offer the secrets they have spent a lifetime acquiring. The greatest gift a master will ever give you is the violent destruction of your self-imposed limits. As human beings, we all operate under a false assumption of our own maximum capacity. We reach a certain speed, a certain strength, or a certain level of intellect, and we assume we have hit our absolute biological or mental ceiling. Because we only compare ourselves to our own past performance, we believe our current limit is a permanent fact of nature. Imagine an incredibly dedicated home cook who believes they possess elite knife skills. They chop vegetables with what they consider to be blazing speed, proud of the rhythm they have developed over the years. One evening, they are granted permission to stand in the corner of a world-renowned 3-star kitchen during the peak of the dinner rush. The home cook watches the executive chef break down ingredients. The speed is terrifying. It is a dizzying, flawless blur of steel and precision that defies logic. In that single instant, the home cook's entire understanding of what is possible shatters. They realize that their perceived maximum speed was essentially slow motion. The benchmark is instantly, permanently moved. The next day, when the home cook returns to their own cutting board, they do not need to learn a new technique. They simply try to match the violent, beautiful rhythm they witnessed the night before. Suddenly, without any new training, they are operating twice as fast. Their previous limit was never physical, it was entirely psychological. This phenomenon applies to every discipline on Earth. When you expose yourself to a true master, your internal barometer for excellence is permanently recalibrated. You realize that your absolute best effort is merely the warm-up routine for a professional. It is deeply humbling, but it is also incredibly liberating. It proves that you have massive reserves of untapped potential waiting to be unleashed simply by refusing to accept your current standard as final. Finally, studying the masters reveals one ultimate unifying truth about perseverance. We look at highly successful people and assume their drive is fueled by a pure, unadulterated passion for their craft. But when you look closely at the origins of their greatness, you rarely find romance. You usually find absolute necessity. Picture a young parent who decides to build a freelance graphic design business. They do not have the luxury of quitting their day job. They work a grueling physical shift at a warehouse, come home, feed their children, and put them to bed. At 10 o'clock at night, when their body is screaming for sleep, they sit down at a cheap laptop in a dark kitchen. They do not work because they feel inspired. They do not work because it is fun. They work because the mortgage is due, because they refuse to let their children grow up in poverty, and because failure is simply not an option they are willing to entertain. They find the hours because they absolutely have to. You do not need someone to hold your hand and tell you that everything will be fine. You need to look deeply at the masters of your chosen field, absorb their brutal standards, and hold yourself to an entirely new metric of excellence. You must stop comparing yourself to your peers and start measuring yourself against the absolute pinnacle of human capability. It will be painful, it will be exhausting, and it will shatter your illusions, but it is the only way to climb out of the valley and take your rightful place among the greats. Chapter 9. The Art of Subtraction. As you build your routine, execute your daily numbers, and slowly transform into a serial achiever, a beautiful and dangerous phenomenon will begin to occur in your life. You will start to experience genuine success, and success, by its very nature, is a magnet for clutter. When you prove yourself to be capable, disciplined, and reliable, the world takes notice. Suddenly, you are invited to more meetings, handed more projects, and presented with a glittering array of new opportunities. People will ask for your advice, your time, and your energy. If you are not incredibly careful, the very success you worked so hard to build will slowly bury you beneath an avalanche of new obligations. To survive this phase of your journey, you must master a completely different set of skills. You have spent your life learning how to add things to your plate. Now, you must become a ruthless expert at taking things away. You must learn that doing more often results in achieving significantly less. The foundation of this defensive strategy is realizing that you do not need to be world-class at everything you touch. When we are ambitious, we often fall into the trap of trying to be the absolute best in every conceivable arena. But true impact comes from choosing your specific pond and deciding to be the biggest fish in that exact localized body of water. Imagine a mid-level professional walking into a routine weekly departmental meeting. The room is filled with fluorescent light, stale coffee, and a dozen people who would rather be anywhere else. The ambitious professional does not need to be the greatest visionary in their industry to stand out in that moment. They simply need to be the most prepared person in that specific room. If they have read the data, anticipated the bottlenecks, and arrived with 2 thoughtful solutions while everyone else is merely staring at their phones, they instantly become the most valuable person at the table. You do not need to dominate the world. You only need to be the most engaged, the most helpful, or the most knowledgeable person in the immediate space you occupy. This localized excellence naturally creates massive future opportunities, allowing you to rise without spreading yourself impossibly thin. However, as those opportunities arrive, you must deploy the most powerful, difficult word in the human language. You must learn to say no. Saying yes is what gets your journey started. Saying yes to a new discipline, a new challenge, or a new perspective is vital. But once your process is in motion, saying no is what protects your masterpiece. Every single time you say yes to a new request, you are mathematically stealing time and energy away from the core pursuit that actually matters to you. Picture a woman who has spent 3 years painstakingly building a thriving, independent artisanal bakery. Her passion is sourdough bread. She has mastered the fermentation, the temperature control, and the perfect crackling crust. Her bread is so magnificent that her small shop has a line out the door every morning. Because she is successful, local wedding planners start approaching her asking if she can bake massive, elaborate 5-tier fondant wedding cakes. The money is excellent and the flattery is intoxicating. She says yes. Within 2 months, her life is a nightmare. She is staying up until 3 in the morning piping delicate sugar flowers, a task she secretly despises. She is stressed about delivery logistics and bridezilla demands. Worst of all, she is so exhausted that the quality of her signature sourdough begins to slip. She took a great opportunity that completely derailed the specific work she actually loves. She has to learn to look those event planners in the eye and decline. She has to evaluate every request by asking if it truly benefits her ultimate vision, and if it is actually more important than what she is currently building. The answer is almost always no. Saying no is not just about declining external invitations. It is about reclaiming the silent permissions you have unknowingly granted to the people around you. We rarely realize that our daily actions constantly train the world how to treat us. If you are the type of manager who drops everything to put out a minor fire every time an employee walks into your office, you have trained your staff that their minor inconveniences are more important than your deep focus. They will interrupt you endlessly because you have given them permission to do so. If you answer work emails at midnight from your bed, you have trained your colleagues and clients that you are always available, effectively erasing the boundary between your professional and personal life. You must actively subtract these permissions. If you stop answering non-urgent messages after 6 o'clock, people will eventually learn to stop expecting a response. If you close your door for 2 hours every morning to engage in deep, reflective work, your team will learn to solve their own minor problems during that window. By withdrawing your constant, fractured availability, you force the people around you to become more independent, and you buy back the massive blocks of time you desperately need to do what you do best. This philosophy of subtraction extends into the very mechanics of how we seek improvement. When we want to get better at something, our instinct is to look for a massive, sweeping overhaul. We want to completely reinvent our lives overnight. But the most sustainable path to greatness is not found in massive leaps. It is found in the relentless accumulation of tiny, almost invisible adjustments. Imagine a single parent who feels completely overwhelmed by the chaotic rush of getting their children ready for school every morning. The stress of lost shoes, spilled cereal, and missing homework leaves everyone exhausted before the day has even truly begun. The parent feels like they are failing. Their instinct is to attempt a radical overhaul, perhaps setting their alarm for 4 in the morning to artificially create more time. But waking up exhausted only makes the chaos worse. Instead of a massive change, the parent applies the principle of tiny marginal gains. They look at the chaotic morning and break it down into its smallest component parts. They realize that searching for backpacks takes 5 minutes, so they install a specific hook by the door and mandate that the bags are hung there the night before. They realize that deciding what to pack for lunch causes decision fatigue, so they create a strict, repeating menu for the week. They program the coffee maker to turn on automatically. None of these changes are revolutionary. They are tiny, 1% improvements. But when you stack 5 or 6 1% improvements on top of each other, the compounding effect is staggering. Suddenly, the morning routine is smooth, quiet, and peaceful. A fraction of an ounce of friction has been removed from a dozen different places, resulting in a massive reclamation of time and emotional energy. This exact same principle of tiny, compounding improvements is the secret to sustaining the most important element of your entire life, your personal relationships. We often believe that a successful marriage or a deep friendship requires grand, cinematic gestures. We think we need to book expensive vacations or buy lavish gifts to prove our devotion. But relationships do not survive on grand gestures. They survive on the microscopic daily interactions that signal respect and care. If you want to improve your relationship, do not try to overhaul your entire personality. Just try to be 1% better. Be 1% more conscientious by simply putting your phone in another room when your partner is speaking to you. Ask for their advice on a minor problem, which silently communicates that you deeply respect their intellect. Offer a single, highly specific word of sincere praise about something they did well that day. Give them 1% more space and privacy when they look overwhelmed. These actions seem insignificant in isolation, but just like the morning routine, they compound. When you consistently inject tiny amounts of grace, patience, and genuine celebration into your relationships, you create an unbreakable foundation of trust. You become a team, and having a stable, loving partner who genuinely believes in you is one of the most powerful, unfair advantages you can possibly possess when navigating the harsh terrain of your ambitions. The art of subtraction is ultimately about clarity. It is about clearing away the dense, suffocating brush of unnecessary obligations, toxic habits, and fragile ego so that the mighty tree of your ambition has the sunlight and oxygen it needs to grow. It requires the courage to disappoint people who demand your time and the discipline to ignore the glittering distractions that do not serve your ultimate vision. Do less. Strip away the excess. And watch how beautifully and how quickly you begin to soar. Chapter 10. The Bottom Line of Greatness. We have reached the end of this conversation, and if there is one singular, absolute truth you must carry forward into the rest of your life, it is this: you must stop telling the world about your dreams. A dream is a beautiful, necessary starting point, but a dream without a blueprint is nothing more than a wish floating in the wind. The world is utterly exhausted by people talking about what they hope to do someday. Do not tell people what you dream of becoming. Tell them your plan. Or better yet, say absolutely nothing at all. Lower your head and let the undeniable results of your daily execution speak for you. When you dare to dream on a massive scale, you must be willing to plan on a massive scale. And as you begin to execute that plan, you will inevitably look up at the titans of your chosen industry, the master artists, the elite performers, the brilliant entrepreneurs, and you will feel a crushing sense of inadequacy. We look at the people who have reached the absolute pinnacle of human achievement, and we build a grand mythology around them. We assume that beneath their tailored suits and composed, media-trained expressions, they possess a genetic immunity to self-doubt. We assume they operate with a supreme, unshakable confidence that we simply do not possess. This is the final grand illusion you must shatter. The playing field is entirely level. Underneath the armor of success, the people you admire are just as insecure, just as hesitant, and just as vulnerable as you are. The only difference between the people who achieve extraordinary greatness and the people who remain paralyzed by mediocrity is that the greats felt the exact same terror you feel, and they found a way to take the step anyway. Imagine an elite professional stunt driver preparing to execute a record-breaking high-speed vehicle jump. They have done the mathematical calculations, they have practiced on smaller ramps, they know the physics, but as they align the vehicle at the end of the runway and accelerate toward the massive, intimidating incline, the brain's primitive survival instinct kicks in. The mind screams at the body to hit the brakes. In that moment, despite years of elite training, the driver's right leg begins to shake violently. It is an involuntary biological response to extreme danger, a physical manifestation of pure, unadulterated terror pulling their foot away from the gas pedal. What does a professional do in that moment? They do not close their eyes and wait for the fear to pass. They do not pause to recite a positive affirmation. They take their right hand, press it fiercely against their own shaking thigh, and physically force their foot to keep the accelerator pinned to the floorboards. This happens at the highest levels of every demanding profession on earth. There are world-class trial lawyers who still have to dig their fingernails into the wooden podium to stop their hands from visibly shaking during an opening statement. There are brilliant surgeons who step into the operating room and feel their breath catch in their throats. They do not possess a magical absence of fear. They simply refuse to let the fear dictate their actions. When you finally step into the arena of your own ambitions, you will face moments where your hand shakes, where your voice cracks, and where your mind desperately begs you to retreat to the safety of the known. You will feel imposter syndrome washing over you, trying to convince you that you do not belong in the room. When that happens, you must recognize that you are not failing. You are experiencing the exact same physiological response as every champion who came before you. It does not mean you are weak. It means you are human, and it means you are finally standing on the precipice of something that truly matters. You must reach down, steady your own hand, and keep the pedal pinned to the floor. There will be days when the journey feels impossibly long. There will be seasons where your energy is depleted, your confidence is bruised, and the finish line seems to be moving further away. When you find yourself in that dark valley, you must remember the mechanics of the human spirit. Do not try to summon a massive wave of motivation out of thin air. Do not look up at the intimidating peak of the mountain. Lower your gaze to the ground. Look exclusively at the very next step of your process. Put on your running shoes. Write the next paragraph. Make the next phone call. Read the next chapter. Focus entirely on the gritty, unglamorous execution of today's work. Allow yourself to experience the quiet, undeniable pride of checking that single box. That small victory will spark the dopamine. The dopamine will generate the motivation. And that motivation will carry you into tomorrow. You do not need to wait for the perfect moment because the perfect moment does not exist. You do not need to wait for a lightning bolt of inspiration because you are the one who strikes the match. Your dreams are vital, but it is your relentless daily plan that will drag those dreams out of the ether and build them into a magnificent reality. Stop waiting for the fire. Get started. Work your plan. The motivation you have been searching for your entire life is waiting for you on the other side of the work.